The crystalline ship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a shard of starlight, its surface rippling with patterns that defied human comprehension. Inside, Crixus, one of the galaxy's most renowned merchants, observed the sprawling metropolis below through sensors that perceived reality across 12 dimensions. The beam's form shifted like liquid mercury contained within an invisible barrier, its thoughts manifesting as pulses of bioluminescence across its surface. Earth had long been an anomaly in the Galactic Council's records. While other civilizations progressed along predictable technological and social trajectories, humans seemed to defy every model of development. They survived catastrophes that should have ended them, achieved breakthroughs that should have been impossible, and maintained a chaotic society that somehow didn't collapse under its own weight. The ship touched down in New Singapore's International Trade Zone, where Earth's governments had established controlled contact points with extraterrestrial civilizations. Crixus emerged onto streets where holographic advertisements competed with the neon glow of traditional signs, where hovercars shared space with pedal-powered rickshaws, where the old and new collided in ways that made no logical sense to the merchant's ordered mind. Through the crowds, a sound caught Crixus' attention, something that their sophisticated sensors struggled to process. Following it, they found a young woman sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk, drawing a bow across an ancient wooden instrument. Raina Kumar hadn't eaten in 2 days, but her violin sang with an intensity that made passers-by stop in their tracks. Her dark eyes were closed, fingers dancing across strings as she played a melody that seemed to weave between the noise of the city. Crixus' form rippled with confusion. Their sensors detected energy patterns emanating from the musician that didn't match any known forms of power generation. The merchant's analytical systems attempted to quantify the effect her music had on the humans around her, how their neurochemistry shifted, how their movements synchronized unconsciously with her rhythm. Fascinating. Crixus spoke, their words translated into sound waves that made nearby windows vibrate faintly. You generate emotional resonance without technological assistance. Raina's eyes snapped open, her bow freezing mid-stroke. She'd seen aliens before. Everyone had since first contact 5 years ago, but never one that looked like a living mirror, never one that had spoken to her directly. "I'm just playing violin," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Nothing special about that." Crixus moved closer, their form casting strange reflections on the wet pavement. "Incorrect. You are producing quantifiable changes in local consciousness patterns through primitive vibrations of processed tree fiber and animal protein. This should not be possible without quantum harmonizers." A small crowd had begun to gather, humans and aliens alike watching the strange interaction. Raina felt her heart racing, but forced herself to remain calm. Years of performing on the streets had taught her how to handle unusual situations. "Music isn't about technology," she explained, positioning her violin again. "It's about feeling, about connecting with something deeper than circuits and equations." Before Crixus could respond, Raina began to play again. This time, she chose an old Earth melody, one that had survived centuries of cultural shifts and technological revolutions. The notes soared above the city noise, carrying with them something that Crixus' sensors couldn't categorize, something that made the merchant's liquid form shiver with unfamiliar sensations. As the crowd grew larger, Crixus noticed something else. Subtle energy patterns beginning to form between the gathered humans, invisible threads of connection that their most sophisticated analysis couldn't explain. It wasn't telepathy or any known form of consciousness sharing. It was something else entirely. "Stop," Crixus commanded, their voice carrying an edge of discomfort. The music ceased abruptly, leaving an almost painful silence. "This requires investigation. You will come with me for testing." Raina clutched her violin closer. "I don't think so. I'm not a lab rat. Your cooperation is not optional. The anomalies you generate must be studied and controlled." The crowd stirred uneasily. Someone stepped forward, a street vendor named Marcus who had watched Raina play every day for the past year. "She said no," he stated firmly, positioning himself between the musician and the alien merchant. More people moved forward, forming a loose circle around Reyna. None of them spoke, but their intent was clear. Crixus's sensors registered another impossible spike in energy patterns, something building in the air between these humans who had no special abilities, no advanced technology, nothing but an inexplicable willingness to stand together. For the first time in their centuries of existence, Crixus felt uncertainty. Their protocols for handling primitive species didn't account for this kind of response. The merchant's form swirled with conflicting patterns as they processed the situation. "This will be reported to the council," Crixus announced finally, their form beginning to retreat. "Your species requires closer observation." As the merchant disappeared into the crowds, Reyna let out a shaky breath. The people around her began to disperse, returning to their daily lives as if nothing unusual had happened. But something had changed. Some boundary had been crossed, some secret revealed. In their ship, Crixus began composing their report to the Galactic Council. How could they explain what they'd witnessed? How could they quantify the power of music to move emotions, the strength of strangers standing together, the energy that seemed to arise from nothing but human will? The merchant's sensors continued to record data, searching for patterns that could explain the inexplicable. But deep in their crystalline core, Crixus felt the first stirrings of something dangerous. Doubt about everything they had ever believed about the nature of power in the universe. High above New Singapore, Crixus's ship had transformed into an observation post, its crystalline walls now lined with monitoring equipment that tracked the movements of millions below. The merchant had spent 3 full cycles analyzing the data from their encounter with the street musician, but instead of answers, they had found only more questions. The Galactic Council's response to their initial report had been swift and disturbing. Proceed with containment protocols. Acquire test subjects. Determine the source of the anomaly. In the weeks since their first encounter with Reyna, Crixus had witnessed 17 more instances of inexplicable energy signatures across the city. A mother lifting a crashed vehicle to save her child. A teacher calming an entire classroom of panicked students during an earthquake with nothing but words and presence. A homeless man surviving conditions that should have been fatal. Initiating Phase 2, Crixus announced to their ship's AI as they activated a series of cloaked collection drones. The crystalline surfaces of their form had grown darker, troubled by the implications of what they were about to do. Below, in the warren of streets that made up the city's oldest district, Reyna was no longer playing her violin in public. Instead, she moved through shadow-filled alleyways, following a trail of mysterious messages that had begun appearing in her apartment. The latest had led her to a basement bar called the Broken Record, its entrance marked only by a scratched vinyl disc hanging above a rusty door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of synthetic tobacco and real fear. Dozens of people huddled around tables, speaking in whispers. Reyna recognized some of them. Street performers, laborers, teachers, ordinary people who had all experienced something extraordinary. "Welcome to the resistance," a voice said behind her. Reyna turned to find a tall man with burned scars covering half his face. "Name's Jackson. I used to be a firefighter until I walked through flames that should have killed me. That's when they started watching me." "They?" Reyna asked, though she already knew the answer. "The merchants," Jackson replied, leading her to a table where others waited. "They're not just trading goods anymore. They're studying us, collecting us. People are disappearing." A woman with silver-streaked hair leaned forward. "I'm Dr. Nandini." She introduced herself. "Until last month, I worked at the Extraterrestrial Research Institute. What I discovered there..." She paused, hands trembling slightly. "The merchants believe we're developing something they call reality resonance, the ability to affect the physical world through pure will and emotion." "Like my music," Reyna whispered, remembering how Crixus had reacted to her playing. "Exactly," Nandini nodded. "But it's not just music. It's art, emotion, determination. Anything that comes from the core of human spirit. They can't quantify it, can't control it. and that terrifies them. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The conversation died as a low hum filled the air. The sound of cloaked drones moving into position. Jackson cursed under his breath. They found us. The ceiling erupted in a shower of debris as collection drones punched through, their crystalline forms identical to Crixus's ship. Panic erupted as people scrambled for exits, but energy fields had already sealed them in. "Remember what we practiced," Jackson shouted above the chaos. "Feel it, don't fight it." Reyna watched in amazement as Jackson stood his ground, his eyes closing in concentration. The air around him began to shimmer, just as it had when she played her violin. Dr. Nandini joined him, then others, their fear transforming into something else, a collective will that made the very air vibrate. The drone's energy fields flickered, their crystalline surfaces showing signs of stress. Reyna felt something building inside her, like music without sound, a force that connected her to everyone in the room. Without thinking, she reached for it, let it flow through her. Above in their ship, Crixus reeled as their sensors overloaded. The energy patterns were off the charts, completely defying the laws of physics as they understood them. "Impossible," they whispered, watching as their collection drones began to crack. In the bar, the resistance members had joined hands, forming a circle. The power flowing between them was visible now, a shifting aurora of human will made manifest. The drones' containment fields shattered, and their crystalline forms began to disintegrate. "Stop," Crixus's voice boomed through the remains of the ceiling. "You don't understand what you're doing." But they did understand. For the first time, humans were fully aware of their power, and they were no longer afraid to use it. The last drone exploded in a shower of crystal shards, and the energy in the room gradually dissipated. Reyna opened her eyes to find the bar in ruins, but every person still standing, their faces showing equal parts exhaustion and amazement. "What happens now?" she asked Jackson, who was helping Dr. Nandini to her feet. "Now," he replied grimly, "we prepare for war. They won't stop with drones next time." In their ship, Crixus composed an urgent message to the Galactic Council. The situation had escalated beyond containment. The humans weren't just generating anomalous energy patterns. They were learning to control them, to combine them. Worse, they were organizing. As the merchant waited for a response, they reviewed the sensor data one last time. There was something hidden in the patterns, something that suggested an even more troubling possibility. What if this power wasn't new? What if humans had always possessed it, dormant until now? The Council's response arrived with unprecedented speed. "Initiate Protocol 0. Earth must be quarantined before the anomaly spreads." Crixus's form darkened to an almost black mercury as they absorbed the implications. Protocol 0 meant no more observation, no more tests. It meant the end of human freedom, and possibly humanity itself. Protocol 0 descended upon Earth like a silent storm. Massive quarantine ships materialized in orbit, their crystalline forms blocking out the stars. In New Singapore, citizens watched in horror as shimmering barriers began to form around the city, cutting off all communication with the outside world. Inside the Broken Records underground network, now spread across abandoned subway tunnels beneath the city, Reyna watched Dr. Nandini work feverishly at a makeshift laboratory constructed from salvaged alien tech and human ingenuity. "Their barriers operate on quantum frequencies," Nandini explained, her silver hair wild from sleepless nights of research. "They're designed to contain not just physical matter, but consciousness itself. They want to cage our minds as well as our bodies." Jackson emerged from the shadows, his scarred face illuminated by the blue glow of stolen merchant technology. "We've got reports coming in from all over. People are manifesting abilities everywhere now. It's like the quarantine is triggering something in us." Reyna touched the old violin case at her feet, remembering how her music had first revealed this power. "It's fear," she said quietly. "Fear and defiance. They're pushing us, and we're pushing back." A young teenager named Y burst into the lab, out of breath. "You need to see this," he gasped, activating a salvaged holoscreen. The display showed crowds gathering in the streets above, facing off against hovering merchant vessels. But instead of panic, the humans stood their ground, a strange luminescence beginning to emanate from their joined hands. Crixus watched the same scene from their command ship, their crystalline form practically vibrating with agitation. The energy readings were unlike anything they'd ever seen. Humans all over the city were generating reality warping fields strong enough to interfere with merchant technology. "This defies all known laws of physics," they transmitted to the council. "The humans, they're not just resisting the quarantine. They're changing it, changing reality itself." The council's response was immediate and cold. "Your concern is noted, Merchant Crixus. Protocol Zero proceeds as planned. If the humans can alter reality through will alone, they represent an existential threat to galactic order. Containment must be absolute." But containment was proving impossible. In the streets, ordinary people were discovering extraordinary abilities. A nurse named Tarek found he could heal with a touch, his compassion manifesting as visible light. A construction worker named Luna discovered she could reshape metal with her thoughts, her years of understanding materials becoming something more than knowledge. In the underground lab, Dr. Nandini made a breakthrough. "Look at these patterns," she said, pointing to complex data streams. "What we're doing, it's not magic or even some new evolution. We're accessing something that was always there, something fundamental to the universe itself." "What do you mean?" Raina asked, studying the swirling patterns that reminded her of music made visible. "Reality itself is malleable," Nandini explained, her eyes shining with discovery. "The merchants built their entire civilization on technology that could manipulate it. But humans, we can do it naturally. Through emotion, through will, through the very thing they've always dismissed as chaos." Jackson leaned against a wall, processing this. "So when I walked through fire, you weren't defying physics," Nandini nodded. "You were rewriting it. We all are, in our own ways. The merchants' greatest fear isn't our power. It's that we prove their entire understanding of the universe is wrong." Above them, the quarantine barriers began to pulse with increasing frequency. Crixus' sensors detected something unprecedented. The humans' reality resonance was beginning to synchronize across the city. Every act of defiance, every moment of human connection, was adding to a growing wave of change. In their ship, Crixus made a decision that would alter the course of galactic history. They began composing a message to the council, not of warning, but of revelation. "The humans are not the anomaly," they transmitted. "We are. In our pursuit of order, we forgot that the universe itself was born from chaos. These beings, they haven't discovered something new. They've remembered something ancient." Before the council could respond, alarms blared throughout the merchant fleet. The quarantine barriers were failing, but not through force or technology. They were being transformed, the very nature of their reality altered by millions of humans acting in unconscious concert. Raina stood in the underground lab, her violin in hand, surrounded by others who had found their own ways to touch the fabric of existence. "They tried to cage us," she said softly, raising her bow. "But they forgot something important." "What's that?" Wei asked, his young face glowing with the same inner light that now filled the room. "You can't cage a song," she replied, and began to play. The music that flowed from her violin was like nothing Earth had ever heard, a melody that carried within it the defiance of an entire species, the harmony of millions of souls refusing to be contained. Through the tunnels, through the streets above, through the very barriers meant to contain them, it spread. And as it spread, it changed things. Not through violence or force, but through the simple, profound truth that reality itself was just another kind of music, waiting to be rewritten. In orbit, Crixus watched their sensors dissolve into meaningless static, their understanding of the universe crumbling in the face of human potential unleash. The quarantine wasn't failing. It was being transformed into something else entirely, something that neither human nor merchant truly understood yet. The awakening had begun, and there would be no turning back. The Galactic Council's response to Crixus' revelation was swift and terrible. Massive warships emerged from hyperspace, their crystalline forms darker and more angular than the merchant vessels. These weren't designed for containment. They were built for erasure. But Earth was no longer the same planet they had sought to quarantine. The awakening had spread like wildfire across continents, across cultures, across the artificial barriers that had once divided humanity. Every attempt to suppress it only made it stronger. In what used to be New Singapore's financial district, now transformed by reality distortions, Raina stood with Jackson and Dr. Nandini atop a building that shifted like liquid architecture, responding to the collective will of its inhabitants. Below, the streets had become rivers of light as humans channeled their newfound understanding of reality. "They're targeting the nexus points," Jackson reported, his scared face illuminated by the ethereal glow of human consciousness made manifest, "trying to disrupt our connection to reality itself." Dr. Nandini's hands moved through the air, manipulating holographic data streams that were as much emotion as information. "They don't understand," she said. "They think this is about power. It's about understanding, about remembering." Raina watched as a council warship descended through the clouds, its weapon systems charging. She lifted her violin, no longer afraid. "Then let's help them remember too." The music that poured from her instrument was different now, not just a melody, but a key that unlocked something in everyone who heard it. Around her, others added their own harmonies. A street artist named Omar painted reality into new shapes with sweeping gestures. A dancer named Jun moved through forms that bent space itself. Even the children had found their voices, their laughter creating ripples in the fabric of existence. Aboard their command ship, Crixus fought an internal battle. The Council had branded them a traitor for their messages of warning, but they couldn't deny what their sensors showed them. Humanity wasn't just accessing reality. They were healing it, restoring patterns that had been forgotten when the galaxy chose order over harmony. "You must see this," Crixus transmitted to the Council, their crystalline form pulsing with urgency. "They're not destroying reality. They're remembering how to sing with it, the way we all once did, before we chose to cage infinity in equations." The Council's response was a barrage of energy weapons that carved through the sky. But where they struck, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't fight back. They transformed the energy, their combined will turning destruction into creation. Gardens bloomed in the impact craters. Shattered buildings reformed into impossible architectures that celebrated both order and chaos. In the underground lab, now a cathedral of shifting light and shadow, Wei worked with other young people who had grown up straddling the line between human chaos and alien order. They had discovered they could communicate with the merchant ships themselves, speaking to the living crystal that had forgotten its own origins. "The crystal remembers," Wei told Raina, his eyes glowing with inherited memories. Before they shaped it into ships and weapons, it was part of the same dance we're remembering now. Everything was. Above the city, the first Council warship began to change. Its crystalline surface, touched by the resonance of human consciousness, started to pulse with colors that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for millennia. The change spread from ship to ship, a reminder that even the most rigid structures contained the memory of freedom. Crixus watched in awe as their own form began to respond, the living crystal of their being remembering its first dance with reality. They understood now why the Council feared humanity so much, not because humans were powerful, but because they were awakening a truth that had been buried beneath eons of control. It was never about eliminating chaos. They transmitted, their message now reaching not just the Council, but every crystalline ship in orbit. It was about learning to dance with it. On the ground, the resistance had become something else entirely. Not an army fighting against oppression, but a chorus teaching the universe to sing again. Every human who awakened to their true nature became another voice in a harmony that had been silenced for too long. Dr. Nandini's research had revealed an incredible truth. The merchants' technology, their entire civilization, was built on the bones of this ancient understanding. They had taken the living crystal, which once danced freely with reality, and forced it into rigid patterns. Their quest for order had been a forgetting, a voluntary blindness to the beauty of chaos. As the Council warships descended to unleash their final assault, humanity rose to meet them, not with weapons, but with a remembering. Raina's violin sang to the living crystal of the ships. Jackson's scars glowed with the same fire that had once marked him, now a beacon calling others to remember. Dr. Nandini's equations dissolved into pure understanding. The sky above Earth became a dance of light and consciousness as humans reached out not to fight the Council ships, but to remind them of what they once were. The living crystal responded, centuries of enforced order giving way to remembered freedom. Crixus, their form now shifting through colors that had no names in human languages, made their final transmission to the Council. We sought to contain them because we forgot how to contain ourselves. They're not showing us something new. They're reminding us of everything we sacrificed in our pursuit of perfect order. The battle for Earth was becoming something else. Not a war between chaos and order, but an awakening that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of both. And at its heart, a species that had never forgotten how to dance with the impossible, even when they didn't know they were dancing. The transformation of Earth's sky was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Council warships, their crystalline forms awakened to ancient memories, danced with aurora-like waves of human consciousness. The rigid barriers between order and chaos, between technology and spirit, between merchant and human, began to dissolve. In what had once been New Singapore's spaceport, now a garden of crystalline flowers that sang with their own inner light, Raina stood with her violin lowered, watching as the last vestiges of the Council's assault transformed into something beautiful. Beside her, Crixus's form had evolved beyond its mercurial constraints, flowing like liquid starlight. We forgot. Crixus spoke, their voice now carrying harmonics that made reality shimmer. In our drive to catalog and control the universe, we forgot that we were born from the same chaos we feared. Dr. Nandini approached, her silver hair now streaked with patterns that shifted like constellation maps. "The living crystal," she said, reaching out to touch one of the transformed flowers. It was never meant to be a weapon or a cage. It was meant to be a bridge. Throughout the city, humans and merchants alike were discovering this truth. The young ones led the way, their minds unburdened by preconceptions about what was possible. Wei and his friends had learned to communicate directly with the living crystal, their thoughts creating ripples of color and sound that spread through the transformed landscape. "Look," Jackson called from above, his scared face now bearing marks that glowed with inner fire. He pointed to the horizon, where the quarantine barriers were undergoing their final metamorphosis. Instead of walls meant to contain, they had become windows into possibilities that neither species had imagined alone. The Galactic Council, faced with the undeniable evidence of their civilization's forgotten origins, had fallen silent. But through the living crystal network that now spanned Earth's atmosphere, their confusion and wonder were palpable. Centuries of certainty were crumbling, replaced by something both terrifying and exhilarating. The freedom to not know. It was never about power, Raina realized, looking at her violin with new understanding. We didn't overcome their technology. We reminded it of its true nature, and it reminded us of ours. From the transformed council ships came new voices, not of command or control, but of awakening. Other merchant species, their own forms beginning to shift and change, descended to Earth not as conquerors or traders, but as students eager to remember what their civilizations had forgotten. In the underground lab, now a chamber of living crystal that pulsed with the combined insights of human and merchant science, Dr. Nandini worked with a team of both species. They weren't just studying the phenomenon. They were learning to speak a language that existed before words, before mathematics, before the artificial division between art and science. The universe itself is both particle and wave, order and chaos, she explained to a group of merchant scientists whose crystalline forms rippled with excitement. We didn't discover this power. We simply stopped denying our place in the dance. Through the transformed city, through the world, through the very fabric of space itself, a new understanding was spreading. Humans found they could read the ancient memories encoded in merchant crystal, while merchants learned to feel the music of pure emotion. The barriers between species, between matter and energy, between thought and reality, became permeable. Crixus, once a mere merchant, had become something else, a bridge between what was and what could be. Their reports to the council were no longer about containment or control, but about possibility. We sought to measure the universe, they transmitted, but it was never meant to be measured. It was meant to be experienced, to be sung, to be danced with. The children of both species led the way into this new era. They played games that reshaped reality, told stories that came alive in the air around them, and learned to see the universe not as something to be conquered or controlled, but as a partner in an eternal creative dance. Reyna stood at the heart of the transformed spaceport, surrounded by crystalline gardens that grew in response to her music. She lifted her violin one more time, but now she played not alone, but as part of a greater symphony. The living crystal sang with her, its voice carrying the memories of stars. Humans and merchants added their own harmonies, each bringing their unique perspective to the greater whole. The song they created together was neither chaos nor order, but a perfect balance of both. It spoke of a future where the line between technology and magic, between science and art, between merchant and human, had dissolved into something greater than either civilization had imagined possible. Earth, once seen as a primitive anomaly in the galactic order, had become something else. Not a threat to be contained, but a reminder of what the universe could be when all its children remembered how to dance together. The merchant's fear of chaos had been transformed into an understanding that true order could only come through embracing the unpredictable, the emotional, the wild creativity that lived in every corner of existence. And in the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not power or technology, or even the ability to reshape reality, but the simple, profound reminder that the universe itself was born from a dance between order and chaos, and that true wisdom lay not in controlling that dance, but in joining it. As the transformed council ships departed Earth, they carried with them not just new understanding, but new questions. The age of rigid certainty was over. The age of wonder had begun. And in the heart of New Singapore, where it all started, a street musician's violin sang to the stars, reminding them how to dance.